Retiring in your 40s, 50s, or 60s is not a dream, it's a maths problem. And if you're thinking it's too late, do not accept that before calculating your numbers. Now, as a former investing advisor trained specifically to help clients retire early, I'm going to show you how to assess your income, assets, and debt, and then work backwards to find the income that you need to retire. So then you can see whether retiring by 2030, working part-time, or investing for a few more years is realistic for you. Okay, so the first thing that's really important is to understand what retiring actually means. Now, retirement doesn't just mean never working again, although it can absolutely mean that. But for this video in particular, when I talk about retiring, I mean you being in a position where you no longer need to work your 9-to-5 job because your assets and other income sources is enough to replace your 9-to-5 salary. And at that point, your 9-to-5 job becomes optional. And when it becomes optional, the whole world opens up. You might want to work part-time, spend some time with your kids, but also make some more money. And some of you might think, you know what? I'm 55 and I've got enough money to retire. I might just work till 60 and just let my investments compound for me. So there's no one size fits all. It's really all about giving you the freedom and flexibility to live life on your own terms. Now, this is probably the most important part of the video. You are financially free when work becomes a choice, not when you reach a specific age. And like I alluded to earlier, there's only two things you need to know when it comes to retiring. And number one is where you are today financially. So when I mean financially, I simply mean how much are you earning at your 9-to-5 job? Do you have any savings? Right? Do you have any savings? Do you have investing accounts? Do you have a retirement specific account? Now, what I mean by that is, again, I'm from the UK, so bear with me if I'm wrong. I think it's a Roth IRA if you're in the US. Do you have a specific government retirement account that you've been putting money in? All that stuff adds up, right? And now that you've done that, you've got to ask yourself, what does retirement look like for you? And please do take a whole day or even a whole week of just thinking, like, what do you want from life? Like, what do you want your retirement to look like? And again, I know we talked about financially, but just try and dream, right? Try and dream about where you want to be, what the life you want to live. Do you want to spend all your time with your wife and kids? Do you want to downsize, move to the countryside? Just think, what do you really want? And then we can put the money behind it afterwards. Because again, even as an investing advisor, the first thing I'd always ask my clients is, what do they actually want? Describe your dream life to me. Describe what retirement looks like. And then, once we know what retirement looks like, we can put the money or the financial figure behind it. Now, the best way to retire is simply to make more money so you can use that excess cash to fuel your investment portfolio. And that's why I've made a free guide showing you the 7 best businesses and how you can earn up to $10,000 a month. And yes, it is possible. I've done it. And the good thing is, as you're more mature and as you have more experience, you're going to succeed much faster than the younger, get-rich-quick sort of audience, if that makes sense. But the reality is, the more money you can put in, the sooner you can retire. So go check out that PDF. It's in the pinned comment down below. And one of the businesses is investing, where I break that down specifically on how you can invest. So in the PDF, in the pinned comment down below, completely for free. Go check it out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to break down retiring per age bracket. So 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, I don't want you to be, let's say, 51 and think, okay, I'm going to ignore the 40s part. I want you to watch this whole thing because you're going to find, like I said, there's no one size fits all. I'm going to give you a rough sort of guideline. And even me, I'm 25 years old. However, my mindset is probably aligned to this 40s-year-old, which I'm about to talk about. Now, if you're 40 or in your 40s, you're actually still relatively young. You might not think that, but in terms of investing and financially, you are very young and you're in a golden spot where you're probably earning quite a lot from your 9-to-5 job because you've got the decades of experience. However, you still got a significant amount of time to let compound interest play out. So again, like we said, it's all about your goals, and I really want to push you towards something specifically, which I've seen like every client, every person I've ever worked with, and me in particular as well, which is generational wealth, right? You probably have kids. You probably are thinking, okay, you know what? If you're like me, you probably are similar to me. You probably grew up with not much money, probably in poverty, and you don't want your kids and your grandkids to go through that. So this is where things like generational wealth can become really important. And generational wealth, for those who don't know, it simply means having wealth. So let's say, for example, a property portfolio, index fund stocks that you can hand down to your kids and they can hand down to their kids. So basically your whole family your whole bloodline, are very wealthy. Now, as you're 40s, you can focus a lot more on growth rather than income. And you should, and I don't want to say the word, when I say aggressive investing, a lot of people think crypto. We're not talking about crypto or some, putting your life savings into some, scam firm. What we are talking about, though, is, you know what, maybe I want to, I'm 44, let's say, for example, maybe I want to put a lot of my money into stocks, not so much into bonds, not so much into income, because I'm looking to retire at 55, for example. So this is why it's really important to have the end sight in mind, so then you can work backwards. So if you're in your 40s, I would strongly recommend going more into stocks. The reason for that is stocks will give you much more growth. So when you get to the point where you want to retire, you can sell that index fund, you can sell those stocks, and then with that big lump sum, put it into property, put it into bonds. You can even purchase an annuity, which is we won't talk about it, but essentially you can go to an insurance company and get a guaranteed income for life as long as you live, right? It will be a small amount, but it's still guaranteed, which is pretty good. Now, if you're in your 40s, I would say the objective is not to retire as quickly as possible. Unless that's your goal, if that's genuinely your goal, by all means go for it. However, what I would say is build enough assets that it gives you the freedom to do whatever you want, right? Because the more options you have, the more freedom you have, the more choices you have, the better it is for you. Now, when you're in your 50s, you want to shift from maximum growth to starting to slowly replace your 9 to 5 income. So you want to calculate what can your current assets realistically provide, and then calculate the gap between that and the income that you actually want. Now, as I said earlier, you don't need to retire right away. You might want to work part-time, and then when you work part-time, of course, you can spend time with your wife and kids, but you can also make money from your 9 to 5 job, which you can use to fuel that investment portfolio, because the longer you wait to touch your investments, the better. But I don't want to put this, into your mind that, wait till you're 80 to enjoy it. No, you want to enjoy life, right? If you want to enjoy life, by all means, go and do it. But just remember, the longer you wait to touch your investment portfolio, the better. So it's really a delicate balance. But the key focus and the key difference when you get into your 50s is we really want to start de-risking, right? We really want to start de-risking, and we want to actively prepare to leave our 9 to 5 job, whatever that looks like, whether that's reducing our hours. Maybe you want to stay at your 9 to 5 job, absolutely fine. I mean, you could stay at your 9 to 5 job. Some of you might want to put another year or two just working at your 9 to 5 job, use that income to really grow up that investing portfolio, and then you can take a step back, right? Because you can be making $10,000 a month, right, from your investment portfolio if you just spend a few more years at your 9 to 5 job. Remember, you've got the compound effect working for you. The longer you wait, the more money you will make over time, right? Because it's all compounding for you. So when you get into your 60s, it's all about actively preparing to retire, like imminently, right? It's imminently. So you really want to move away from growth to income. And what I would recommend, and this probably will appeal to you, is you probably want 75% of your portfolio focused on income producing assets and 25% focus on growth. Now, the reason why is, let's say you're making $5,000 a month from your income focused investments, and you might be like, hey, Atif, I'm happy with that. You could leave the other 25% focused on growth investments like stocks, index funds. Let them compound for you. And there's two things you can do. Number one, it's amazing for generational wealth. Just let it compound, and hand it off to your kids and your grandkids. Or number two, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, is you can borrow against that, which is pretty advanced, but we'll talk more about that in a second, which is really good. And another thing I want to talk about is taxes. Now, I'm not going to go into depth into taxes at all, because obviously it depends on the country, but one thing you want to remember is when you withdraw income, you're going to get hit with income tax, which is the worst sort of tax, right? Because it's very high, right? Regardless of where you live in the West, it's very high. Whereas obviously if you just got your assets compounding for you and you're not selling them, like, you don't have to pay capital gains tax. And also, something you probably want to think about is inheritance tax, which in the UK is 40%, which is almost insane. It's probably going to be pretty high in the States too, or wherever you live. So inheritance tax is pretty important. So there's ways to avoid it, but at this point you really want to go to a qualified investing advisor, specifically in your state or country or whatever, who knows all the tax laws. Now, when it comes to retiring, there's really only 3 assets that I'm going to recommend. And number one is stocks and index funds. Now, I'm assuming you know what stocks and index funds are. If you don't, it's literally just an ownership of a company, and an index fund is just a collection of companies all in one umbrella, so to speak, right? So the good thing is with stocks and index funds is they're really good for long-term growth, right? They're really good at growing. However, they don't pay as much income. You can get dividend stocks, which will pay probably, depending on where you live, it'll probably pay around 3 to 7% is a pretty good dividend stock. But the reality is stocks are good for growth. And then you have property, which in my opinion, if you want to retire early, or if you just want to retire, property is by far an amazing thing. I think it's made more millionaires than anyone else, and it's perfect for generational wealth, right? If you want to hand something off to your kids, I mean, if you've got 10 rental properties, it's kind of hard to mess that up. Do you know what I mean? So anything can happen in the stock market, but property is usually quite boring and reliable, and it's really good for income too, right? Really good for that passive income, and a significant amount of income that you can make from property. And best of all is you can actually leverage your assets, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. And last but not least, we have bonds. Now, bonds are a loan that you give to the government. You can give it to corporations, but really when I talk about bonds, I'm talking about government bonds. You can lend money to the government and they'll pay you interest every month or every quarter. It can be structured differently, right? But they'll pay you regular interest. Now, the good thing is it's essentially guaranteed, because the government never defaults. They just print more money, which of course causes its own problems, right? But they'll never default. They'll just print more money, which causes inflation. But bonds are, if you were like, okay, Steve, I've just sold, or I've downsized my house, or I've sold my rental properties and I've got 100 grand, and I don't want any risk whatsoever, bonds are your best bet, right? You just want to park your money into bonds. You don't want to keep in a savings account for two reasons. Number one, interest rates are usually quite low. Number two, banks can go bankrupt, right? Now, in the UK, they've increased it to £125,000. In the States, I want to say it's 100 grand, where the government will protect you up to 100 grand. Anything above that, if the bank goes bankrupt and you've got 500k in a bank account, they're only going to protect the first 100k, right? You lose the 400 grand. And you did nothing wrong. So when you've got your money in bonds, it's as safe as it can possibly be, because it's the government, and the government doesn't default. They just print money, as we all know. And make sure you like and subscribe, right? Because it helps the channel. And this is a pretty good video. I've given you a lot of really good advice here. Now I'm going to give you a massive bonus tip, which is you can start borrowing to really aggressively grow your investment. So let's say, for example, you own a rental property, and I see this all the time, right? I mean, this happened in my family, which is you and your wife move in, you buy a house, and let's say you owned a house, but that house that you used to live in on your own is now a rental property. So you and your wife, you live in one house together, amazing house, but you've also got another rental property on the side. What you can do is you can remortgage that property, you can pull the money out of it, and then you can reinvest that money. Now you might be thinking, okay, Tifa, is this like a Ponzi scheme? What the hell's going on here? This is what all the billionaires do, so it's actually pretty interesting. So you might have a rental property and you might remortgage it, and you could pull, let's say, $25,000 out of that property. And let's say it's at a 3% interest rate, right? I don't know what the interest rate will be by the time you're watching this video, but let's say it's 3% interest rate and it's $25,000. What you can do with that $25,000 is you can invest that into one of the assets that we just talked about. Now, if you make more than 3% return on that $25,000, so let's say you make a 7% return and the initial cost is 3%, you're going to make a 4% profit on that $25,000. So this is how you probably see these guys online. I'm not even just online, you've probably heard of them, right? Where they like, within like 2 years, they've got 100 rental properties. You think, what the hell do they do? This is what they did. They remortgaged it. They bought a house that needed a lot of work doing. They did the work and they increased the value and they remortgaged it. It's called buy, refurbish, refinance. So that's one thing you can do. And again, it's pretty hands-on. But another thing you can do is, let's say you've got $100,000 worth of index funds or stocks or property, is you can go to a specialist lender and they will borrow against that. So what that means is you can be like, okay, you know what? I've got 100 grand worth of the S&P 500. It's sat in my bank account. It's cool, but I don't really want to sell it. I don't really want to do anything for it. What you can do is you can go to a bank and say, you know what? I want to buy a rental property, but instead of me putting $25,000 down, what I will do is I'll give you $25,000 worth of the S&P 500 should I default. So it's called collateral lending. And you might think, if you're going crazy, no, I'm not going crazy, right? This is what all the millionaires and billionaires do, because the good thing is about this is you're borrowing. So when you borrow, and you really need to understand this, right? If you want to retire without getting taxed the crap out of, it's when you borrow, it's debt. Right, when you borrow money and it's debt, no one can tax that because you're in debt, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. How could you tax debt? So when you borrow, you're in debt. But if you sold the S&P 500, if you're like, okay, Steve, I've got 100 grand worth of the S&P, I want to sell 25k worth of it. Well, you're going to get hit with capital gains tax, right? You're going to get hit with these big taxes and expenses and stuff. So this is why all the millionaires and billionaires borrow, because it's tax-free, and this is why they don't sell, right? So when it comes to retiring in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, what you need to do first is understand where you are financially, and then number two, understand where you want to be specifically, not what anyone else thinks, but what do you want specifically. So once you know where you want to be and where you are currently, everything else will fall into place. So if you want to learn specifically, because I know this was a pretty high level overview, but if you want to get into the nitty gritty of how to retire early using this aggressive investing strategy, you need to watch this video on screen now. Check it out and see if it's a fit for you.